So welcome everyone to the SDSU Extension and NDSU Extension Master Gardener Lunch and Learn Continuing Education Series, or Winter Lunch and Learn, we're calling it. My name is Prairey Walkling. I'm SDSU Extension Master Gardener Field Specialist based in Rapid City. And today's presentation is the first in a series of continuing education opportunities offered to our Master Gardeners. This session will be recorded and the recording will be made available. And also for those of you joining us live, if you have questions, please type those in the Q&A box, and that will be at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, you might need to expand your screen view, and we welcome those questions from you. And we also have the chat open today. And today we're delighted to welcome Esther McGinnis, Don Kinzler, Rachelle Vettern, Emily Burkett, and Emily Howe, all from NDSU Extension. 3 are part of the NDSU Extension Horticulture and Forestry team, and 2 are part of the 4-H team. And today's topic is communicating across generations. And our presenters include 1 baby boomer, 2 Gen Xers, 1 millennial, and 1 Gen Z. And the presenters are excited to share defining generational events, influences, slang, and the best methods of communicating with all the generations in the Extension Master Gardener program. We also sent out a notes document prior to the session. So if you want to follow along with that notes document and you utilize that during the presentation. And just a quick note that this is going to be longer than our typical 1-hour session because we have all of these wonderful presenters with us. So it will be 90 minutes and it will involve audience participation. So welcome to all the Esther and team from NDSU. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we will just jump right in and get started. And we do appreciate the extended time because we have a lot to share with you and we have some activities, we have some interactive things. We really want you to be immersed in this information. And as we talk through this, we want you to think about how does this really apply to your work as a Master Gardener or as your Master Gardener program. I know when we all were asked to present this for our NDSU Extension system, they wanted us to really share how we can communicate with each other most effectively as different generations in the community as we work, as volunteers, as workers. And so when we put this team together, we definitely wanted a representation from all generations. So I think we are very open to questions at the end too about our generation. And I know Emily Howe is a Gen Z and it's been fun. She's added a lot of new content and information to this presentation. And I'm constantly having her help me navigate how we reach our millennial generation or our millennial and Gen Z and all these generations the most effectively. So I think this team is a good resource for you too. So with that, I am Rachelle Vettern. I'm the Leadership and Volunteer Development Specialist for NDSU Extension and a professor here on campus. I do have degrees from both SDSU and NDSU. I grew up in South Dakota, so I feel like I'm a winner both ways today with this group. So I'm excited to present, and I will turn it over to, and we'll switch to that next slide, Esther, if we can. You have it already, so I'll let Emily introduce herself first.
Hi, my name is Emily Howe. I am a horticulture and forestry extension agent in Ward County, and I am the Gen Z representative.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Burkett. I'm the 4-H Youth Development Agent up in Ward County. So Emily and I's offices are literally right next to each other, the two Emilys in the office. And I'm representing the millennials. And shout out to South Dakota. Like I said, I grew up not too far away from the border. I grew up on the Minnesota side. So welcome.
Okay, and I guess Rachelle introduced herself, so I'll go next. I'm Esther McGinnis, and I'm the director of the NDSU Extension Master Gardener Program and an associate professor in the Department of Plant Sciences, and I'm a proud Gen Xer.
And I'm Don Kinzler. Greetings. I'm the resident baby boomer today, and I'm the horticulture agent for Extension in Cass County, located in Fargo. Thank you.
Well, here's some of the things. Of course, all good programs have kind of a list of goals that we want to accomplish by the end of it. So we're hoping by the end of this session that you can quickly identify and define kind of the components of each generation. But we're going to move through that information pretty quickly because we assume that most of you have heard or read something about the generations or had discussions about it in the past. So we'll cover some of the key components of each of the generations that we're kind of still working with or volunteering within the community. And then we'll move on to really the important pieces that we have listed. We're going to be able to recognize specific characteristics of each generation, but then really focus on how we communicate most effectively with the different generations and talk about what are our similarities. So we definitely have things in common. And then what are some of those differences among generations as far as their communication choices or preferences. And then finally, again, like I mentioned, we really want you to think about specifically how this applies to your work as a Master Gardener volunteer or Master Gardener coordinator. And the clients or the individuals that you work with, answering questions out there in your communities. How do you most effectively share the information and the knowledge you have in the Master Gardener world? So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll just jump in there and also say that our programs really thrive on recruiting new volunteers too. So we want to recruit new volunteers and breathe new life into our programs, which really entails recruiting, Gen Z and millennials. But as such, we want to make sure that we are very welcoming to them and that we're communicating with them in a style that they embrace.
Yes, thanks, Esther. So the next piece of it is that we really want to think about as we jump into talking about generations, what is a generation? How did we come up with this whole thought that we move from one generation to the next? So if you look it up in the dictionary online, or maybe depending on your generation, you still have a dictionary. We were debating that in the office the other day, whether or not we keep our paper dictionary or if the online dictionaries are sufficient. So if we look it up, you can see that there's a body of living things being constituting a single step in a line of descent from an ancestor. You can kind of read through all of that. But basically, it's saying kind of a cohort of people that have similar thoughts and abilities and kind of strengths or come from a specific time. So I'll have you go to the next slide. And as we think about generations today, I want you to think about your own generation, and we're going to look at the numbers in a minute as far as where you fall as far as years. But a generation really entails, or this whole thought around generations has to do with the values and influences we had growing up. So basically, what influenced you? We know the first 10 years were probably your family or the community that you were born in. And then those influences really started at the ages between 15 and 25. What kind of music you listened to, who you hung out with, which kind of events and activities were part of kind of your generation. So an example of that would be if you think about kind of our silent generation, or those that grew up in the 30s, they're getting up there in years if there are volunteers, but they grew up in the Depression or were children of the Depression. And so they were very fiscally conservative because they kind of grew up with very little money. What we're seeing now is even some of the boomers were influenced by that because they were raised by parents who were brought up in those generations. To flip it, like Esther and I are Gen Xers, we grew up in a little bit more of a time where there was more, the economy was a little better. We didn't have to think so much or be quite as conservative about things. And so you'll just see how things, as far as the environment, kind of change who a generation is. So again, you can kind of see that list. I'll have you go to the next one, Esther, for me. So we're going to pull up a poll. If you take a look at this, today we're going to focus on the ones that are really bolded on this slide, the boomers, the Xers, the millennials, and the Zs, because we love our silent generation volunteers, but sadly a lot of them are telling us they're ready to be done and mentor their replacements. So we kind of focus on those other four, and then Gen Alpha will be coming with us soon. We're going to pull up a poll and have you tell us who you are. If you would just select one as you look at those cohorts and think about which one am I in? Give you just a minute or so to do that. And we have 93 participants on today, so we should be able to have kind of a good distribution here. So quickly vote if you haven't already, and then if you're willing, Prairey, to pull up our results, that would be great. Oh, and some are putting it in the chat if they can't see it in the poll that was pulled up. All right, so now we know who we're talking to. Welcome, boomers. John, you're in good company today. That's awesome. Xers to millennials, and we have some Zs and some silents. So wonderful. Glad to have you all here, and we really appreciate that. It's fun to see who we have. Hey. So again, with the generations, one thing I want to mention before we get to these cuspers is today, when Emily Burkett and I first started working with the generational pieces and talking through this and talking about millennials and all the different generations, the commitment Emily had me make, and that I always ask our audiences, is that there is no generation bashing. Emily and I went to present at a national conference once, and there was one boomer in the crowd who was really after Emily as a millennial about all of the things that millennials did that were challenging or not okay. And really the great thing about this presentation is we celebrate the strengths that we all have, and we all really bring different skills to the table. So we're going to ask in the chat, or if you open up your mics, that we just celebrate and not bash, because we all want to recruit those best Master Gardener volunteers or have those strong programs, and the best ones have diversity as far as generations and other areas too. So with that, I will turn it over to Emily Howe.
All right, so cuspers are people that are positioned between two generations. So I identify more as a cusper than as a Gen Z because I fall right in between Gen Z and millennial. I was born in 1997, so I'm really just on the edge. And cuspers are really great people to have as like mediators and bridge between the two cultures, because we understand both sides of things. We grew up kind of in that weird zone where you're getting some of that previous culture and you're starting to see a lot of that new culture come in. In rural areas, so important for North Dakota and South Dakota, which has a lot of rural areas, sometimes generations can linger a little bit longer. And with that lingering, you might have somebody that was born in one generation, but they identify more with another generation. So just going with the generation bashing thing that Rachelle mentioned earlier is your generation is going to be where you identify. You don't have a hard set one based off of the year that you were born. And that's okay. Everybody is different. Everybody has different life experiences. So we're going to go on to that next slide. And on your worksheet, there is a section, and we're just going to give you a couple of minutes and just write out what you, as your generation, what your preferred form of communication is, any slogans or slang that you might have, and then a myth or stereotype that you feel identifies with your generation. And after that time, we're going to waterfall as a generation. So we'll start with the boomers and just have you share one of those things from the worksheet and then move on through the generations. So we'll go ahead and give you guys a couple of minutes to sit and think about that. All right, and then if you are a boomer, if you want to just type something into the chat, but not hit enter just yet, we're going to all hit enter at the same time, and that's what makes it a waterfall chat, because it all comes in like a waterfall. If you just want to write out, you can do 1, 2, or 3. You can do all of the above if you want, but just go ahead and type out either your preferred form of communication, a slogan, a myth, whatever you're wanting to do. Give you a couple more seconds. All right, so boomers, go ahead and give us all of your stuff. A lot of face-to-face calls, email, groovy. That is one thing that we talked a lot about with Don. His groovy is something that he has not said in a long time, and I think we should bring it back. I think it's fun. Awesome. Awesome. All right, and then we're going to move on to our Xers. Xers, if you guys want to go ahead and put your stuff in the chat. A lot of texting. What's the beef was one that I heard for the first time with Rachelle, and apparently that was a very big slogan for the Xers. It had to do with a Wendy's commercial. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. All right. And then millennials, what are some of the things that you have? Go ahead and put those in the chat. And then we'll go ahead, and if I think there was one Gen Z that responded, if you want to go ahead and put your thing in. And anybody else, just go ahead and add it in. Xers were referred to as feral. I also prefer social media. I am my friends over Instagram or Snapchat before I will text them. And I will switch between 3 different conversations on Instagram, Snapchat, and text messaging. So one of the slogans that we had was, oh goodness, now I can't think of any of our slogans. But now we have Yeet. That was the one that my office is just, they do not understand is Yeet. That is one of our slogans of Gen Z. Awesome. Well, great job, guys. This is all a lot of fun stuff. Yeah, I especially liked that one of the Xers said that not all of us were feral. I love that. It's kind of a fun description of Xers, and we'll talk a little bit about that, why. That's legit. Yeah, awesome. Well, great job, guys. So with that, now that we've kind of identified where you are in your generation and what you remember about some of the things growing up, we're going to break down some of the things that occurred through our generation, starting with the boomers. So Dawn.
Well, good afternoon again. Now, as with most generations, we've had the best of times and we've had the worst of times. Our dads fought in World War II. My parents were teenagers in the Great Depression. They could squeeze a dime until it was purple. And that has, of course, stuck with me as well. The Cold War, we feared communism. The invisible Iron Curtain separated the free world from the communist countries. Many of the public buildings had black and yellow triangular signs on. Those were fallout shelters where we were all to assemble if the Soviet Union dropped the bomb on us, the Vietnam War. When I was a young boy, I lived in fear of being drafted into that war. There were protests all over the campuses in the country against the Vietnam War. In 1970, the Ohio governor called out the National Guard on a protest that was happening on the Kent State University campus. The National Guard opened fire and killed 4 students. They injured 9 others. And so we started to question the establishment, is what we called it. We started the civil rights movement. Why couldn't people of color drink from the same water fountain as whites? How come our kids couldn't go to the same classrooms? Many of our heroes were assassinated. Martin Luther King. I remember where I was when I heard that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I was actually returning to my first grade classroom. I had to go to the bathroom. Woodstock generation. Gosh, and I remember when Ed Sullivan introduced the Beatles on national television, the first in the United States. Boy, there were good times. There were many firsts. My family and I listened to the radio when John Glenn first orbited the Earth in a spaceship. I was in 7th grade when Neil Armstrong, the first man that walked on the moon, and television. I was in 2nd grade when my dad climbed up to the top of the roof and installed a television antenna, and all of a sudden there was movement on the television screen. And telephones, we thought we really had something when the extra long phone cord was invented, so we could kind of wander around the room hanging on to the telephone. And in the next slide, we see some of the things that boomers value. Educated. We were the first generation where college was the norm. My parents, grandparents, none of them attended college. That just wasn't the norm. We tend to be independent, cause-oriented. The civil rights movement, against racial discrimination, against the Vietnam War. We tend to be very cause-oriented. We question authority, and oftentimes with good reason. We're resourceful. Like most generations, we've navigated quite a bit of things. We went from the manual typewriter to the electric typewriter and computers, and we've navigated them all. We tend to be competitive, even as we've aged, bring it on. And now the photos that I selected there are kind of purposeful. Instead of happy-go-lucky baby boomers frolicking on the beaches in Florida, grandparents, we like to take selfies with our grandkids. Many of the boomers are still in the workforce, although as the elderly gentleman there, sometimes we need our grandkids to help us with our cell phones. And of course, the gentleman staring at his computer, possibly he's looking at an Excel spreadsheet, wondering how to move the box without deleting the entire page. So it's been a pleasure being a part of the baby boomers. Thank you.
I'm going to represent Gen X, and we're the smallest of the 4 groups. Our defining events occurred from the late 70s until the early 1990s, and we do have a lot of crises that happened, but also very important technological progress that was made. Now, I barely remember the Iranian hostage crisis that occurred in 1979. It must have been very big for it to impress itself upon me because I was very young, but it did start flooding back this past week with Jimmy Carter's funeral. So that was just really kind of unexpected. We watched President Reagan and Pope John Paul II be shot. But probably the biggest influence out of all of these had to be the Challenger disaster. And like Don, I remember exactly where I was when I heard that the space shuttle had exploded and killed all of the individuals that were on board. I think it had special impact on us because they had included a teacher on the crew. So her name was Krista McAuliffe, and she also passed away in this disaster. But we've also had technological advances. So, yes, I did use a telephone with a cord, but then advances were, MTV and particularly the rise of the personal computer. And with this happening, well, while we were relatively young, we definitely embraced technology. We did not have heroes in Gen X. So we were quite rebellious and we had anti heroes instead. So we had Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, we had Prince and Madonna. And when it came to movie stars, we had the Brat Pack. I know there was another generation that had the Brat Pack, but our Brat Pack made the movies The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire. It was all about that teenage angst. As far as characteristics, we're very self reliant. We've survived a lot of things and we're adaptable. And there's a reason for this. Gen X was probably the first generation in which our mothers went back to work, they didn't stay home. So I was part of that. And I remember my mother going back to work when I was in fifth grade. I was responsible for walking home from school, remembering my key so I could get into the house, making my own snack, and then occupying myself until my mother returned from Bismarck. Um, and I think that had a positive impact on me because it made me more independent. Gen X is also very serious about life because we are in that sandwich generation. We're caregiving for parents, but we still have children at home or in college. So we are definitely stressed out. As far as values, I think every generation wants to claim that we value diversity and the end of discrimination. But I do remember the Cosby Show in the late 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s. And that was really groundbreaking to have an African American family on TV. And they were in careers such as law and medicine. And it just gave me such great hope. And it was an inspiration for me. Um, the mother of this series went to law school and became an attorney. And I followed that path. And I think it was a direct result of that TV show, knowing that anything was possible. All right, so I will pass the baton on to Emily.
Yeah, all right. So to cover some of the defining moments for millennials, I've taught this slide a couple of times, but I updated it this year. So I really wanted to focus on that 15 to 25 years old for the most. And as you can see, millennials are a really large group. They're kind of like the baby boomers. There's just a lot of us. And so I feel like there's kind of the older millennials and a younger millennials, but I'll let you decide. So some of the things that happened, Columbine, a huge mess, school shooting really made the news, and that's the kind of the first time that schools started having metal detectors, taking security more seriously. I didn't have a metal detector in my school, but some of my friends from the cities did. Uh, 9/11 is probably the biggest one for our generation. I feel like those who are maybe after us don't remember it as well, and those who are older were maybe already established in their jobs or careers. But I remember exactly where I was in school when 9/11 happened, and it was a shift in our country. We also had a space shuttle blow up, the Columbia disaster in 2003. Because we're talking about communication, I thought it was important to mention Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter were all launched when we were just getting started. I was in school when these happened. They were super popular. Everybody was on it. And they were just beginning, so there weren't as many rules, I feel like, as there are now. And then the iPhone came out, so we went from flip phones to having a small computer in our pocket. The Great Recession hit in 2008, which really affected our parents' jobs, but also I remember getting my driver's license around that time, and the cost of fuel was so expensive. And so we were really picky about where we went as a family for our budget. Deepwater Horizon, the big oil spill, and then the death of Osama bin Laden. I feel like that kind of ties back to that Facebook and YouTube because that video floated around everywhere and then it got deleted. So I feel like that's when they really started to like, maybe everything shouldn't be all over. Some of our heroes, we did have heroes in our generation. If you attended any graduation speech, it was always thank you, mom and dad. So they're always mentioned. Michael Jordan, the Bulls had a really successful career in the 90s. I feel like the older millennials maybe have a better memory of when Princess Diana passed away, and then the younger half maybe remember when Michael Jackson passed away. And then, of course, the Oprah Winfrey Show was on TV. We'd go home from school and watch it. And Mother Teresa, Bill Gates. And we really value our silent generation, which in my case, that's my grandparents. We were really close with them. All right. So some characteristics. I feel like a lot of millennials, especially when we were younger and graduating from high school, kind of got this label that we were lazy or maybe not ready to launch. But we're actually a really ambitious group. It's because we want to do it all. And we want to set our own path, but we also realize that we can't do it alone. So we're kind of in this flux of I want to do my own thing, but I also realize I gotta maybe ask for some guidance along the way. Shorter attention spans, and I think that's something that you'll see, especially in our youth development circles. It gets shorter every year with every younger person. And so that's when I think they really started to notice. At first, this bullet point said busy. Now I think burnout is a better term, especially as we're getting to be adults. We say yes to lots of things. We want to do it all. We want to have the family. We want the high-paying job. We want to do all the things, and then we get burnt out. We have multi-switch abilities that comes with maybe some of that Facebook, YouTube, internet focus, finding things really quick on Google. We do value education. We want to have purpose. I think that's also why we say yes to lots of things. We see the value in it. High achievers, we are civically engaged, which I think is a good thing, especially in the volunteer circles. We want to make a difference in where we're at and make things better. We value diversity. We are a large group. And we like the flexible and remote options so that we can still do it all. And that I will pass on to Emily Howe and Gen Z.
And Emily, I just wanted to jump in because we've taught the millennial piece for a while. When you say overscheduled, one of the things the research shows, and you should know as you think about asking volunteers in the Master Gardener program, is the millennials were the first generation that truly were overscheduled as far as by their parents or events and activities. I think they saw that the Gen Xers maybe had too much quote unquote free time to themselves. I'd never heard of us as being feral, but apparently we're feral. And so the parents, then the pendulum swung and they scheduled you for everything. So in the workplace or in the volunteer world, we see millennials overscheduling themselves a lot because that happened when they were children. Their all their free time was gone, so they'd stay out of trouble basically, right? So something to think about is if you're a millennial and you start committing to too many things. Sorry to jump in, but I just had to make that point about that generation.
No, that's really good. I've even heard my in-laws say that keep your kids busy and they'll stay out of trouble. Yeah.
Yeah. So Gen Z, the one thing that I kind of want to highlight with Gen Z is it really is started after the events of 9/11. So I remember 9/11. I was 3 years old, and it was very frustrating for me because we were going to be late to daycare. Obviously, not the same emotional memories that everybody else that was older than me had. But it's one of those things where we start to not have that same kind of memory and hold that same significance over the events of 9/11 as some of our predecessors do. So that's kind of why we started there, and 9/11 is kind of a big turning point for the generations. One of the things that I also want to highlight is our history is still being written. I am an older Gen Z. I was born at the very beginning. Those that are born in 2014, they're turning 11 this year. So their generation is still being written. They're still experiencing life and seeing what happens. Everything that is occurring nowadays are going to be those sorts of things that we're going to add to that defining list of things that occur. Some of the things that were really big for us growing up, though, is the social media movements, using social media as a platform to get common ideas across. The Me Too movement was huge. I was in college when that was happening, and I just remember, going through those stories and looking at all these people and just realizing, hey, some of these things we need to talk about. This idea that I had previously is not the idea that I have now, listening to these stories, hearing what's occurring. Same with the mental health awareness and realizing that it's something that a lot of people struggle with, and normalizing normal bodies, looking at figures like Alona Mar and some of the other big athletes that are coming in that are just absolute powerhouses and beautiful, beautiful women and beautiful people, and just coming out and being like, oh, we can look a different way than what the Vogue magazines have said that we could look like. Other things is school safety and mass shootings and those sorts of things. I was in high school when the Sandy Hook shooting had happened, and I remember exactly the emotions. I remember crying because there was a little girl that was murdered by the shooter, and her name was Emily too, and just hitting really close to home with me on that. And because of that, we now have this sense of needing to have safety and really looking at safety. When we're looking at planning locations, I remember I was invited to a location and giving a educational presentation on houseplants, and it was in the winter, and I had to go about 30 yards from the parking lot to the building, and there was no street lights, there was no lights whatsoever. And I remember going in there and being like, I'm never coming back here again. It is too dark. I don't know where I'm at. And I was genuinely a little worried that somebody was going to jump out or something was going to jump out at me. So looking at locations where they're safe, they have well-lit parking lots, they have doors that are easy to access. And that's also beneficial to our other generations as well when we're thinking about all of safety. We're in North Dakota and South Dakota. We get snow and ice. Are we making sure that the paths are shoveled, that we have salt out where the ice can melt and we're not going to cause a fall and issue? Those sorts of things. We want to go to, and one thing I forgot to mention on the previous slide is some of our heroes are the same heroes that the millennials have. So like Taylor Swift, Emily and I have had this conversation where she remembers Taylor Swift from her old country albums, and I know Taylor Swift more from her new albums, and a lot of our younger Gen Z know her from her new album. So we do have some heroes that cross multiple generations. So, okay. And then our characteristics, we're very racially and ethnically diverse. We value that, like a lot of the generations before us, but we've really put a strong emphasis on that diversity. We're very digitally savvy. We like to be able to do things from our phones. I have a computer at home. I'm more likely to do things on my phone than I am on my computer. Very independent. We're skeptical, but we're not doubtful. We just want you to show us the evidence, show us what's going on. We're not doubting you. We just want to see for ourselves. We're also very passionate about the environment and other sorts of advocacy. So I love the picture that says, "We want you to panic." That was taken from a protest for climate change in Canada. And it is. It's something that a lot of the people of my generation, we have these social advocates or social movements that we want to push. And so whether it's from climate change or if it's from other things, we're very passionate about those things. Yeah.
Thanks, Emily. Well, now's the time. We want you to think. We've had such great comments in the chat about the different generations and what you remember, and we appreciate you connecting with all of this information. I'm sure you've thought of a million more things that define your generation, or what you kind of appreciate, or how you like to be treated as a volunteer even. But we want you to take a minute now, and I want you to just number 1 to 10 on your paper, or on the side of the back of your worksheet, or the front of your worksheet at the bottom, or wherever you can find space. And as I go through these really quickly, I want you to think, now that you've heard a little bit about each generation, which one you think really connects, or which one we're talking about. So for number 1, which generation do we feel is innovative and entrepreneurial? Number 2, which generation used the word "that's legit"? What generation did we hear was pretty team or group oriented? Which generation craves independence and confidence? And this one, number 5, I feel like we saw this in the chat a few times. Which one was used groovy to mean cool? Which generation used totally awesome to mean cool? If you know that one. Which generation was the first generation comfortable with technology? Which one is seen as optimistic? Which generation uses slay as meaning cool? And then finally, which generation did we hear was kind of defined by their job? Kind of defined by those. All right, for that first one, if you want to type in the chat, tell me who you thought was, and you can just put either A if that's fastest, or the actual generation, whatever you think's the fastest. So which generation is innovative and entrepreneurial? All right, I see A and C. I would say what we have for an answer is Gen Z, but I think in our times, all of us probably were. We could debate about that one, right? But these days we have so many online startups. The Gen Zs have kind of busted Hollywood and are doing their own thing with influencers and YouTuber. We've talked a lot about that, or Emily did. How about number 2? That's legit. Which generation used that? Legit would be those millennials. That was kind of the Emily Burkett generation. Legit meant cool for that group. How about team or group oriented? Which generation really likes to work with teams or groups? That again would be those millennials. They like to be put in teams, worked as group. They grew up kind of being put in teams. How about number 4, craves independence and confidence? Any idea which one? Yeah, that is definitely that Gen Z one. They like to be independent, confident. How about number 5? We've seen this one in the chat many times. That is A, those boomers. How about totally awesome? Esther has a great story about different generations using others' language, so I won't steal that. She'll probably talk about that later, but that totally awesome is definitely those Xers. How about first generation comfortable with technology? That's those Xers too. Esther talked about that part. How about truly still optimistic about things? That is those millennials are still pretty optimistic about the world and life, or always have been. All right, this number 9, I'm guessing you all know, is sleigh. Which generation uses sleigh? Yep, that's D, Gen Z. And then finally, defined by their job. That is definitely those boomers. Dawn talked a little bit about that competition, that baby boom, and they still to this day really are defined by their job, whereas other generations kind of work so that they can pay for their hobbies or other things. 7 out of 10 correct. That's pretty good. And again, it's just fun to explore. We just covered the tip of the iceberg, and we want to say everyone is unique and individual. And so we don't want to put people in silos or kind of have them just stereotype by generation. Truly, we are just we're influenced by our environment, but you're a unique individual too. So don't just assume that because we say that the millennials like to work in groups, that every millennial likes to work in groups, or just because, not every Gen Xer is completely feral, as we've heard today now. That one's going to make me laugh all day. I'm going to have to think about that. I kind of agree with it though. So I'll have you move to the next slide.
Well, Rachelle, maybe I'll just insert my story here.
Oh yes, tell your funny
because
story. This made me
All right.
giggle.
All right, so this is in respect to slang. So I do like to push my daughter's buttons, and she pushes my buttons too. I mean, it's just how it works. So my daughter is Gen Z, and we happen to be on a little trip with her and her favorite cousin. So I just did a little experiment since we were working on this presentation last summer for a different event. So I started just dropping Gen Z slang into the conversation, and they were just dumbfounded. And as the day went on, they were starting to get angry. And then they started looking up Gen X slang and started saying, "Gag me with the spoon." So long story short, a Gen Xer is not going to have any cred in dropping slang on Gen Z. It's just not going to work at all. So, don't talk about a boy as having Riz or anything. They're just going to laugh at you. So we can't authentically use each other's slang per se, but it's helpful to know slang so we can understand when they drop their slang on us.
Yep, I think that's all about perfect example of, all about communicating effectively or even connecting, like even being able to joke about those different languages. And so as we jump into strategies, I think that's one thing Esther made a key point as you're working with other volunteers or thinking about recruiting future volunteers. I know we have one Gen Z at least on here, finding other Gen Zs to help recruit their friends. Or if you're a boomer, ask other boomers, you can kind of use that language to recruit new volunteers and talk about the amazing work that you do as a master gardener. So some of those strategies are really good, and we're going to touch on that more later. But we wanted to point out, as in the spirit of just having a lot of similarities in different generations too, was that we really want you to think about, and as you work as a collective group of different generations, to help us stop that kind of talk about, one generation just being completely terrible, or this world is that you've heard going to hell in a handbasket, or whatever it is. What we found as we did some research, there was some great slides about the fact that every generation thinks the generation after it is just, has so many challenges. So one of the other presenters I know actually had these slides, and I asked if we could have permission to use them. Ben Winchester from University of Minnesota has used these and found actual magazine covers where, when Don was a teenager, or a little later, those boomers, everyone worried about that generation gap and all the trouble they were causing. And then you could see even 1976, they were still worried about them, the me decade. Same thing with in 1990 when Esther and I, that's a cover from Time, those darn 20-somethings, we're just going to have to worry about them. And so then if you flip to the next one for me, same thing, those millennials. And then same with the early Gen Zs. Oh my goodness, youthquake. How's the world going to change? And we're back to, again, I thought it was interesting, the 2013, that it was me again. So really, this is nothing new. It's developmentally appropriate for young adults to be pretty focused on themselves and focused on just really working on their careers and working on who they're going to be and where their life is going. But they also really, all of us, there's a culture for volunteering and for giving back. And so if we can tap into that and just know that this is not a new issue, that this is something that's been talked about for many, many years. So just know that you can support each other. We've all kind of been through it when we were teenagers and young adults. But there's more strength in us working together than dividing or talking about each other and all of the terrible things this generation is doing. Because this Gen Z generation is incredible, and they truly give me hope for the future, because they're not just gonna try to put a Band-Aid on the problem. They're really gonna try to fix it. So anyway, with that, we'll go to the next slide. And I'll turn that one over.
Great, thank you. Gosh, it comes to mind, though, I haven't said groovy since the late 60s. I may have to bring it back again. So next, let's talk a little bit about communication, both in the workplace and how we volunteer with our master gardeners, but some of the ways that each of the different generations communicate and how they view work, volunteerism, etc. So now, as we go through each of these 4 generations, each of those kind of little breakouts has 2 points. One is kind of how each generation views work or activity, and then kind of where they prefer to work or volunteer, etc. And then also kind of their worker style. So if we go through each of those, now boomers tend to find work is very fulfilling, probably tend to want to do it in an office atmosphere, or even like volunteering, probably on site. Boomers tend to be driven, like to work together, actually see the people, hear the people that they're working with. Now, the Xers were the first to approach work in more of a flexible and fluid manner. You don't have to always be in the office. Anywhere that had a Wi-Fi hotspot, a coffee place maybe could be a spot where you could be working. And so now some of us in generations previous to that thought, well, yeah, that's not such a bad idea. I think the Xers maybe have something. The Xers came up with this new idea, work-life balance. What is that? A wonderful trend that Xers, maybe we need to have a work-life balance. And now the millennials might view work as something you need to do so you can enjoy and pay for the other things in your life. Work makes it possible to do the fun things in your life. Also liking the flexible, fluid type work atmospheres, volunteer atmospheres. They're a determined group. And of course, the Generation Z, they like to be sure that their work and their volunteerism is fulfilling, that they're actually accomplishing something. Of course, they're into the digital media. They also like the flexible work spots, volunteer spots. They're self-confident and independent, and they share much the same attributes as the boomers. I think maybe that's why we get along very well. Well, we get along with all the generations, but Gen Z and boomers have a lot in common. So some of the ways in which each of our generations kind of communicate both in the workplace and the volunteer area.
And this gets into preferred modes of communication. And once again, I mean, these are broad categories, and we did see that there's, definitely some people that depart from this. But overall, the silent generation kind of shuns technology, and they prefer receiving letters or talking on the telephone. Boomers, now, of course, boomers are quite fluent with technology, but they do like their face-to-face networking and being able to build rapport with one another. So I know when I work with Dawn, we like to have coffee and talk face-to-face. Um, Now, my generation, we're all about, efficiency because we are that sandwich generation. So we like to quickly communicate with one another, using email and text. Millennials and Gen Z, all about social media and social networking. I mean, they're really the experts on that. But as Dawn alluded to, that Gen Z is kind of that throwback generation. They do have similarities with the boomers, preferring to get feedback face to face in a work environment or a volunteer environment.
Again, we boomers, when we communicate with people, we do like to see and hear the who and the how of how you're communicating with us. Okay, and here's the reason. Okay, we can detect nuances from what we hear. For example, if I'm talking to you on the telephone, I can tell if you're smiling or not, and I can't hear that in a text message. Also, in a meeting, I can see whether you're rolling your eyes at me. I can read your body language. And so we can build relationships by actually seeing you and hearing your voice. And so boomers, I think, prefer being able to listen and see you.
Gen Xers are a little bit different. We prefer visual modes of communication. So if we can email you, that's just optimal. We'll text, but once again, getting things done efficiently. I have to admit, I'm the one that added this meme to the slide because Gen Xers, we're really not a fan of meetings, particularly if we could have accomplished the same thing by an email or two.
Yep, one of the things we as a team have kind of talked about is how we prefer to communicate in the office even, and if you're communicating with your volunteers out there in office as Xers, we kind of find the IM or Microsoft Teams, those messages, it interrupts workflow. And Esther and I were joking about we really it's just another thing we have to try to manage. We're watching email, we're watching Facebook, we're watching Instagram, we're watching Snapchat. We're trying to keep up with it face to face and some of those things. And now we have Teams to try to manage too. So we just joked a little bit about that. Whereas our Millennial and Z colleagues seem to really appreciate that. So it's all about kind of adapting and maybe trying to figure out what is the best form of communication for everyone. So we also value professional etiquette, depending on how well like as a professor, I want, if a student wants a recommendation from me, I want kind of a professional ask for that, an email, kind of letting me know what you're doing, what you're applying for. If a volunteer is in a situation like that and wants a reference, same thing. So I do want more of a professional, written email. If it's just something going back and forth, it can be more like a chat, but we do prefer that kind of professional etiquette. But we have to learn to be flexible too with the other generations we're working with. We want to be honest and transparent if at all possible. And I think like all other generations of volunteers or coworkers, we like to feel appreciated too. And that doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can just be a simple thank you note or a simple little thank you email or text. So thank you. Go on to the next one.
All right. So as the generations get younger, the communication gets faster. So we already talked about the instant messaging. So if I've got a question, I just want to pop in, ask it quick, and then keep going. I don't want to take up any more of your time than I need to. You might notice that especially the millennial generation, if we could design an office, we would have a lot of flow. People could come in and out. Maybe not sit and stay all day, but I could ask you a quick question. Hey, what are your thoughts on this? And then I get back to what I'm doing. So kind of that fast response. We are still, we value authenticity. We want to have a say in how things are carried out. So if there's a curriculum and you want to incorporate someone else, let them have a little wiggle room and bring their own ideas or flair to something. We like to collaborate, and like I said, we're efficient because we want to do it all. And a good way to show respect is to ask our opinion on something. And I think, generally speaking, we do the same. And I think that goes for every generation, is just asking opinions from each other. So there's a lot of things that probably ring true for all generations. And we like to point out we have a lot in common. We're not as different as we may seem. So.
So like it was said earlier, Gen Z shares a lot of communication similarities with the boomers. We really prefer to have those face-to-face interactions when we're talking about something um, that could be work related. And one thing we talked a lot about with this presentation in general is a lot of the information that we have for Gen Z is related around work environments where but master gardeners are more volunteers. So it may not be that same atmosphere, but this is where the research is. And we, like I said, are still writing our history. We're still a very young generation. So there's going to be some changes through this. And a lot of this is going to focus on work, but know that it could be similar when you're working with volunteers in other generations. But they really do prefer to meet in person. We really do value feedback. We want to know that, hey, this was done well. Like you did do a good job, or this wasn't what I was expecting. Like we're not going to take that negatively, but we just need to know where we're standing with our managers. And we do want those to be more in person. And I think that goes back to what Dawn says about we can pick up those nuances. We can tell from the tone of your voice what's going on. And a lot of us struggle with boundaries at work as the communication gets faster and you have like Teams or Outlook or something downloaded onto your phone. You look at that and you go, oh, I can just quickly respond to that. And then you start to lose that work-life balance. So there's some definite things that we're still learning about with Gen Z and how we prefer to communicate with our friends and with people that we're very close to. Like it was mentioned earlier, like social media is 100% something that we do like to use. Like I said, Snapchat is probably my go-to messaging platform with my friends, but I'm never going to Snapchat my colleagues. That's just not where we like to sit in those professional type environments. One thing that's really interesting, we want to go to the next one, Esther, with Gen Z is we do have phone anxiety. We do not want to talk to you on the phone. We do not want to pick up the phone and call you. If we are going to call you, we're probably going to lean more towards a FaceTime or video call over an actual phone call. And 87% of Gen Z, and this is from a study in Australia, they prefer to send it over a text message rather than calling somebody. So just having that mentality. And if you're a county or you're an agency that has a plant hotline, maybe working with some of the older generations and giving them flow charts or ways that they can build up their confidence with the phone and answering those plant specific questions in order to just ease some of that anxiety and ease them back into this is the phone. I know when I first started, I made a really big boo-boo with the phone because I got too nervous and I accidentally dialed 911. You have to dial 9 to get outside the outside line and then 1 for before the area code. And I messed up and I went back on the phone number and I dialed 911 and it was very embarrassing. So just those sorts of things, like be willing to have those conversations and let them know like this is something that's okay. When they're dialing the phone and how to have those proper phone etiquette conversations.
Now, as we are communicating, now we as master gardeners are perpetually organizing things. We're organizing, horticulture and gardening workshops and maybe garden tours and such. But the question becomes, how do we best communicate with different generations? Can we do so with social media? And which forms of social media actually work? Now, in looking at this particular slide, it's a bar graph. So I want to make sure that I don't lose you. So you'll notice that from left to right on each bar graph, we move from the younger generations to the more mature generations. Gen Z is going to be more orange or red. Millennials are blue. Gen X is green. And boomers are going to be more of that yellow coloration. So as we look at that, if you're trying to use social media to reach Gen Xers and boomers, Facebook is really your platform to use. So as you are trying, if you're trying to reach those generations with your programming, posting something on Facebook is going to pay off for you. YouTube is probably one of the top 3 platforms also, but you'll notice that it's going to be reaching more of the Gen Z, millennial, and Xers as opposed to boomers. If your programming is geared towards to Gen Z, and millennials, you're going to move on to Instagram. So Instagram is absolutely gold if you are trying to attract the Gen Z and millennials to your garden tour or your houseplant propagation workshop. So these are the 3 platforms that you should focus on. TikTok may not be usable depending upon if you're employed by a certain state. This is actually prohibited for NDSU to use. So these are the 3 platforms where you'll get the most bang for your buck, and you can certainly tailor your message and tailor whom you're going to reach by your decision of platform. I'm not going to ignore traditional media either. So you'll see that we have television, radio, and print publications broken down by gender and by age here. Television is still a really good platform to use if you're trying to send a message out to Gen Xers and to boomers, as well as the silent generation. Radio is going to have a little bit diminished returns as compared to television. And then print publication is going to be even lower, but it's still important if you are trying to reach boomers and the silent generation. Or you can do as Don Kinzler does, and he uses all of it and leverages, social media and traditional media to reach lots of people. And really that hybrid approach of not just focusing on traditional or not just focusing on social media, but using both together to reach larger and more diverse audiences is the way to go. Oops, Emily. I'm sorry. So I am going to hand this off to Emily to talk about social media outreach to millennials and Gen Z because she's going to do a much better job than I would on this one.
So with this social media outreach, there is a couple different things that are looked for in the millennial Gen Z group. So they're wanting to have material that makes them look good. So they don't want you to have, like, we don't want to see your failures. We only want to see the positive outcomes, the positive outlook on things, how to prevent failure in your houseplants, how to have the most productive garden, all those sorts of things. And then content that also makes them feel good about themselves. So soil health, how can I compost and have lower food waste and increase soil health with composting, economic or ecosystem services, using those, like how can I plant these trees correctly and contribute that, but also be funny. Like, we're not wanting to sit here. We're looking to be entertained by our social media. We're looking for it as an escape from the usual things that we're seeing. So be funny with it. You can add a joke in. Personally, I like a good pun. I am a sucker for a plant pun. So if a video or something has a plant pun in it, I'm more likely to watch it, but using that sort of humor in it is really helpful. So as an example, I put together a very fake social media post. If you were looking at recruiting some volunteers, Esther. So the big word for the summer was brat, and brat means embracing a playful, confident, and slightly rebellious attitude. Very unlike what brat might mean to some of the older generations as a kid that is misbehaving or not doing what they're supposed to do. this was taken on a very positive note. And it was also with this really bright, like neon green. And using these colors, these sorts of languages, and to try and attract those younger generations. Now, like Esther said earlier, authenticity with slang and language is very important. Gen Z is going to be able to tell instantly if a boomer made a Instagram post saying, this is so Brad, like they're going to know instantly. It just doesn't have that same authentic energy. So maybe if you have a Gen Z volunteer or a high schooler or somebody within your office that is of that culture, maybe run it by them, be like, hey, is this the proper use? Does this make sense? That sort of thing. The other thing is we want to catch the attention with the post with all the information in the comments. You don't want to post all of the words on that picture. I'm not going to be able to read it. I'm going to scroll right past it. It's not something that's going to hold my attention and make me want to learn more about your program. And as social media has advanced, so has social media etiquette and things like that. We do not use a million hashtags. I remember when I first got on Facebook years and years ago, where millennials had really just embraced the hashtags. And I say this with as much love in my heart for the millennial people, because they really did start the social media movements. And there's a lot that they have trailblazed for us, but they would hashtag everything. That is not something we do anymore. You want to use hashtags as like a search key. So you want to have like a couple of words that might be informational, like Master Gardener Program, volunteering, gardening. So all those sorts of things, just to kind of group it into categories. If you're going like with a certain movements, or be aware of some movements, you don't want to accidentally end up on the wrong side of hashtag search histories. But other than that, it's pretty simple. I say that as a Gen Z, where I think it's simple, but it's okay if you struggle with it. Just do the best you can.
Okay, so we're gonna let you have a little bit of practice with all the tips and tricks that we've shared with you. So, you guys are master gardeners. What's a buzzword right now? Pollinators. I even hear it in schools, and I'm not even doing like a master gardener or garden related theme. They're like pollinators. Yeah. So, you're gonna do a workshop for the community on building a pollinator garden. And I want you to think about, we'll give you 5 to 10 minutes. What would be a good time? Do we have enough time for 10, guys? Looking at the time.
Let's do 8.
8? Okay. All right. So I'm going to set my timer for 8. So who are you trying to reach? What's your group? What channels are you using? Is it just one? Is it multiple? What's your message that you're trying to convey? Is there an element of entertainment to your message? And if you chose a visual, why did you choose it? So I'm going to set my timer for 8 minutes. And feel free to work on this on a piece of paper, and then we can hear back from you in about 8 minutes. All right, folks. So we've had about 8 minutes. I hope that was enough time. It looks like we've got a couple that have put theirs in the chat. If anybody wants to highlight it, I think we have the ability to unmute you if you really want to share your thoughts with the group. So if there's anybody out there who's like, me, I want to unmute, we have the opportunity.
I see several events that I would definitely go and join from the chat.
Ooh, we've got some conversations about how to reach people through emails. That's really cool. MailChimp, Constant Contact.
So
All right.
Emily, I guess I wanted to ask you about the constant contact. Are you able to do, is there a free version of it or are you paying for it?
I believe, and maybe Emily can highlight it too. I don't know who pays for it, but we have it in my county.
Yeah.
But we do have the paid version. And I do enjoy that all my, like you can have it set up as lists. So it is easy in that aspect, but it is. We've had to start moving to that because my emails have not been received at all.
That makes a lot of sense.
Well, we found out, so I haven't used Constant Contact, and our 4-H administrative assistant hasn't really either. We send lots of emails to like a family listserv, and NDSU actually flagged her for sending so many emails in a day. And they're like, "You're spam," and she's like, "But we have so many families, so we might dabble into Constant Contact in the future." But it was just a really like, oh, I guess we could look that way without trying.
Yeah, and I was not sending to nearly as many people and they were still not being received. So that's why I like Constant Contact, is because it does get pushed through. But I also like the play on words that I see. Let It Be was a good one. And just using the different words and how to use those puns, add that humor element. That's awesome.
And I'm just looking at the time and we have about 6 minutes left. So there's some great notes. I keep reading the chat. It's wonderful. So maybe we want to have, that's a great activity. Continue to think about and talk about in your local county offices or regional areas, but maybe we better have Emily move on. Sorry.
Esther, unless Emily, do you have something else you want to add?
There we go. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So one of the things that we want to have y'all keep in mind as you think about generations going forward is that there are stereotypes. Like we mentioned at the beginning, there is stereotype that, I'm kind of with Rachelle laughing about the Xers being feral and that certain generations are lazy. Those are stereotypes. So you want to keep those in mind, that those are not necessarily an accurate reflection of a generation. The generations are loosely defined. You might identify more with one generation than another, and that's okay. So I really encourage you guys to focus on some of the similarities, realize that people change, that as the generations get older, they might embrace newer technology and things like that. There also is a class bias associated with generations. It focuses mainly on studies of middle class families and communities, and these may not be accurate when you look at other socioeconomic statuses and things of that nature. So these are my master gardeners in my county. They're awesome. I love them. And I'm sorry for any of them that are pictured that are on this call for not telling you about that. Surprise. So if we want to move on, some of the things that we have in common as master gardeners, we love learning. We love plants. We also have a strong disdain for certain plants. Like I have a good we have bonded over our common disdain of field bindweed and how much we strongly detest field bindweed. Good coffee, good food. Everybody likes to receive recognition. Everybody likes to feel valued. Having those respect, belongings, those sorts of things, just have those aspects in mind when going forward with new generations and with generations that you have not interacted a lot with. And you'll just be fine.
Great. Well, hopefully we have covered our program, our learning objectives for the day. Hopefully you'll take these, and again, we'll send out these slides and really think about the communication strategies we've discussed and kind of walk through in the different generations and have a true respect for the different generations. And again, just want to encourage you, if you have questions, we're going to share our emails in just a minute here, but let's go to the next slide, Esther. I know Prairie's going to be sending out an overall, like an evaluation of webinars. And so just want to let you know that that'll be coming out in the future. And then let's go to that next slide, Esther. This is our contact information. Again, communication wise, we figure you're probably going to email us, maybe call. You can check out, I know some of the Master Gardener groups have websites also, social media platforms too. So just feel free to reach out to any and all of us if you'd like to. Esther is our main contact here, I suppose, between the two states and Prairey too. And then let's just go on to that next slide. I just want to show you, we will, as we send out the PDF of this, we have all of these references. If there's more information, we've been really tried to be really focused on getting that information to you, so you have that if you want to look up and explore more. And we've tried to make, if at all possible, since we're extension, we really do try to focus on making that information research based. So we want to thank you for joining us and being with us today to explore these generations and how you communicate most effectively. And it was fun to read the chat, and thank you for being so respectful. I just can't say enough about my team, even just having this mix of generation, this team. We've laughed and giggled and really talked about the best ways to communicate in the extension world, because there are so many of them. So I guess if we wanted to answer any questions or anybody else make any final comments, otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today for this extended workshop or lunch and learn. So I'll turn it back to you, Esther and Prairey.
Well, and then I think Prairey will probably do an announcement regarding next week's webinar. And I believe next week is going to include both a speaker from NDSU and SDSU, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right, Esther. Thank you all so much. This was so much fun today, and I think we all have a lot of ideas about how we can apply this information, working in our communities and with our fellow Master Gardeners. And next week, on the 22nd, next Wednesday, we have How to Lead a Garden Tour, and our presenters will be Sydney Trio from McCrory Gardens and Rachel Saylor, who's an NDSU Master Gardener and organizes garden tours in Fargo. And we did have one person with a hand raised. Jeanette did. All right.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Prairey, and thank you for allowing us to speak and collaborate across state lines. I think we'll probably be collaborating more in the future. So this is just a great opportunity. So we thank you for it.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you all for your time today, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Bye. Have a good afternoon.